Hello, everyone. My name is Simon Bogdanovich. I am the Chief Business Development Officer at Liquidity Solutions. I'm here based in sunny Los Angeles, California. I want to thank everyone for being on with us here today. So giving you a quick background on Liquidity Solutions. Really, the company is founded to help combat COVID-19 and offer critical support to governments and private enterprises by really streamlining the process of acquiring life-saving medical supplies and equipment. And we've developed through our suppliers and manufacturers integrated testing, tracking, and health passport, digital health solutions so that governments as well as businesses can reopen their economies in a safe and a secure way. So our mission as Liquidity Solutions is to protect humanity from the catastrophic events of the pandemic with safety equipment, testing, and solutions that span the globe. Thank you. And now I will pass it off to Alice, who will get us into the first session of the forum. Thank you.
Okay, now let's move along to session 2, which is titled The Fast-Paced World of PPE Supply Chain and Logistics. So here we will hear from supply chain leaders and factory operators who will share insights on PPE testing kits and compliance issues. So your moderator today will be Wen, who is the co-founder of Liquidity Solutions. Wen, please kick off the panel.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this COVID forum. As Alice mentioned, I'm here to introduce some of these great speakers here, specifically about PPE and the supply chain. I'd like to first preface with what we hope to achieve in this session, which is that it's obvious that PPE-related supply chains are overwhelmed due to the surge in demand of COVID-19. Obviously, we've seen this all over the news, all over the world. It's very, very pervasive. However, there's so much that goes into the manufacturing of a product and getting it from point A to point B. And along that entire chain, there are obviously complications that can be encountered and risks to stakeholders. So hopefully this session will shed some light on that supply chain. Now, what I'd like to do is introduce these three wonderful speakers. We have Patrick Carico, James Shea, and Sultan. I will let them each actually do a very quick introduction of themselves, and then we can get right into some of the questions I'm sure people are eager to hear about. So let's start with Patrick. Okay, I think.
Hello?
Yes, you are in and out, muted again.
Okay. Better now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. No problem. All right, I'm Patrick Calico, who's the business intelligence analyst for Adventist Health. Adventist Health has 26 hospitals, and they're in the top 10% of the United States. So in my position, I analyzed all the data, clinical, logistical, and billing data to come up with a picture and present a solution. I was also on the logistics team because it was going to a Costco-like buying system where one supplier acted as a middleman for all the rest of the suppliers. We had to vet out, because the process of vetting suppliers was very difficult at a local level. They were trying to contain costs by one company basically doing all the vetting for us. It had its advantages in terms of cost, but in terms of how we use product, it was very difficult and slow. So that's kind of what I've been doing lately.
You're muted.
Oh, am I still muted?
No, when.
Oh, when you're muted.
Okay, wasn't able to unmute there for a second. Thank you, Patrick.
Sure.
So James, please, quick intro. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, good day, and good morning to everyone who's joined today. My name is James Shea, and I'm founder and operator of Gushing Consulting. We're a manufacturing supply consulting group based in the United States with staff throughout Asia. What we primarily do is we service the Silicon Valley startups, other product-based development firms, and we support them in the commercialization of their products. We first review the manufacturability of their designs, and then when appropriate, pair with them and design supply chains and do strategic sourcing for these clients and help them scale up their products as they go through Series A and Series A investment and then large scale manufacturing and introduction into the markets. Specifically for COVID-19 PPE, I've been assisting Wen and the Liquiditi team in performing strategic sourcing and validating suppliers all throughout Asia, primarily within China for a number of the components that we are looking at.
Thank you, James. Oz, please.
Sure. I wear two hats. I work with Radiology Solutions Incorporated, which is a 23-year-old importer of radiology, nuclear imaging, and PPE equipment. And so with the move into, the COVID era, we've ramped up quite a bit. And I'm also part of the enterprise engineering team over at Radiologics. And so Radiologics is looking to, it's 5 years in development, and we've basically recently deployed a blockchain solution for PPE that can go from manufacturer all the way to user. What this allows us to do is to track not just efficacy as well as costing, but go and validate, exact steps inside of the supply chains. And we've seen a tremendous amount of fraud over the past, a couple months. I'm excited to talk about that, but I'll just give you a number. Florida paid $600 million for product that never showed up. And these types of risks are now affecting every single hospital in America. So the more that we can do to securitize these things, I think the happier we'll all be.
Thank you, Oz. Actually, since you've brought that up, why don't we let you take the floor on that, because I know you're doing some fascinating work utilizing blockchain as well on compliance and fraud prevention, which is obviously very relevant to COVID-related PPE. What are some red flags to take note of to avoid falling into some possible fraudulent transactions?
There's a lot of them. I mean, it depends how you're buying. So if you're the hospitals, what you want to do is you want to start validating some of the brokers and the broker networks that are coming to you, because what's happening in many cases is you could have a product. I'll give you an example, say a box of gloves coming into the United States after the cost of shipping. So your FOB cost, which means like your cost in Vietnam or Thailand or Malaysia or somewhere else, might be like $7. There's obviously some margin that's going to be built into that, and then it depends how fast you want to get it here. Do you want to get it here by a plane? Do you want to get it here by a boat? And there's multiple boat options. Getting it here by a boat's pretty cheap. But when you start looking at things that have higher landed prices, what you want to make sure, number one, is that there's not too many brokers inside of that chain. Two is that you need to be doing at least DUNS checks and some basic background checks to make sure that the people that you're doing business with are legitimate. In many cases, what we found is that there were companies that hadn't been registered in years, companies that weren't operating, brokers, brokers that were presenting fraudulent goods. And that, I think, is the most catastrophic, because in many cases, you have hospitals where you have executives on the phone almost crying because what we find out is that a lot didn't exist. And so what we're trying to do with the Radiologics product and blockchain is basically start integrating from the factory forward and then into some of the secondary ecosystems, because we also see that there's going to be utility in larger hospitals selling to smaller hospitals and creating some of these supply chain systems that currently kind of, work in sort of a de facto way. And then beyond that, basic certifications. Is what you're buying, are the FDA certifications up to date? If it's CE, are the CE certifications up to date? If this was imported, were the duties paid on these things? And you can ask for all of this stuff. But I think that the challenge is that most large healthcare systems that are doing procurement, and now states that are doing procurement, they're just trying to get whatever they can get. The state of New York, for example, and the state of Texas, it's cash and carry. So if you if you show up with 1 million masks and the masks pass, you're getting paid potentially $2 to $3 a mask in cash 3 hours later. And that's in New York and Texas, they write you a check. But those are considerations to keep in mind, because it's become a very high profit margin, high volume industry very quickly. And there's just a lot of onerous pitfalls to look out for.
Okay, thank you for that. Actually, that's you touched upon a lot of things there. And obviously, I think this conversation, we're going to realize, anyone that's listening in, going to realize there's a lot to unpack in everything, in every sentence, because there's so much going on in this world, and this happens so quickly. And really, in just the last 3 months alone, you've seen, well, let's say 4 months. I mean, it's an entirely new annex to an industry, right? And many people are involved, many who are actually trying to do good things, but many who are also not. But you did touch upon something about compliance. James, you really are one of the most seasoned sourcing supply chain experts that I've had the privilege to glean insights from. And I know that we've had discussions about manufacturing and understanding what it takes to create PPE. And we know that it isn't particularly complicated to make. So why is it so difficult for compliant goods to be manufactured?
Thank you for the question, Wayne. Yeah, the like masks, gloves, and other barrier garments, they're not particularly difficult to make. The processes are pretty well known and established. Much of it is automated, especially on the mask and glove side. So we have a question or an issue with the availability of the core elements of manufacturing, manpower, the availability of material, the availability of capital machinery, and then the given amount of time. With the outbreak, the demand for product has vastly increased. It's tens, hundreds of times higher than what existing manufacturing was capable of performing. As we had discussed on a number of occasions, like one of the infrared thermometer manufacturers that we've been speaking with, prior to the outbreak, their annual capacity was at most 250, 500,000 units annually. They weren't really pushing all that much. But with a check with them over the last week, they're now producing over 1 million units per week. That's a dramatic increase in the capacity and scope of their operations. Not only do these companies need to find the actual factory floor spaces or the buildings to perform the work in, they need to find and identify and qualify and train the personnel to operate in those facilities. Last, the availability of the materials has been a big bottleneck, specifically for the nonwoven fabrics. In the past few months in China alone, like Sinopec and a few of the other manufacturers have created from scratch and built nonwoven, melt-blown manufacturing lines. Normally, it's recognized that these lines take about 4 to 6 months to place on order, construct the machinery, and then run through qualification processes. Generally, after the machines come online, there are a preliminary engineering qualification, and then the additional pre-pilot validation runs. And then finally, once the lines are qualified, then they're ready to prove out and run one lot after another. Some of these manufacturers have brought on these raw material manufacturing lines in as little as 18 or 20 days. So you can expect a lot of variability and variance on the quality of the goods that come out. So in many cases, we're having trouble with a garbage in and garbage out scenario where while product is being produced, the core material for masks and for garments is being produced. However, it's difficult to validate and check the quality of these goods. Both the manufacturers themselves have a shortage of test equipment. The downstream on the manufacturing chain, those companies that have set up to produce these masks and using automation to boost manufacturing, they don't have the ability to review and examine and adjudicate the quality of the goods that come in. Over the past few months, or more recently, as companies have become more established in these spaces, and the test equipment manufacturers have actually caught up with the orders, we're seeing gradually that the quality of the goods are improving. However, with that, now there are thousands and thousands of manufacturers available, specifically within China. And how do you cull through all of those organizations to figure out, to separate the wheat from the chaff here? We've seen numerous cases where goods are delivered both to Europe and also to the United States, while on the outward appearance, they look perfectly fine. Their fit or their filtering efficiency just hasn't been up to snuff, and it's led to some embarrassing rejections and several political hot potatoes for the governments over here. In response to that, countries have the regulatory agencies have instituted a number of guidance, both for limiting the availability or the qualification of products that are accepted within the country. The FDA has several whitelists for goods for both non-N95 type respirators. That list has gone through some fairly dynamic expansion and contraction over courses of the past 8-10 weeks, where initially there simply just wasn't enough product. They would loosen the requirements and expedite the qualification of products that are coming in, only to find after failures of their products, there's a contraction in those approved on the whitelist, and that have required further testing and qualification. And now that we're what, about 5-6 months into the outbreak, we're reaching a steady state condition where both the availability of qualified manufacturers have increased, and yet at the same time, the goods have also, the quality of goods have become more stable. So it's been really challenging for the manufacturers to get really quality goods out, and for the buyers to try to assess, as I was pointing out, what really works, what's actually acceptable.
Well, James, you know what it adds to that too is, are you running into issues with certifications and decertifications of these factories? Because I mean, the process has become kind of interesting. If you have a health company in America that will purchase that product, who's examine that product, you can literally go and take a couple of letters, go to the embassy, the U.S. consulate in whatever country you're in, and they can give you an interim FDA certification. But I mean, we're already getting notifications right now that factories in Vietnam are going to start getting decertified inside of the next 30 days. The other challenge you have is India came online, right? But I think we've all seen these gloves. The standard is 4 mil. Why? Because chemotherapy drugs require you to have 4 mil to handle them. Ideally, the surgical ones are somewhere between 5 to 8, and then those are sterilized in single pack. But the quality control on some of this stuff that's coming out, where the wholesale cost of these boxes is like $350. There's holes in the gloves. The stuff's less than 3.5 mils. It's all food grade. And so I think then there's the gown issue we've seen, right? And then there's also the issue with the state of Illinois literally putting China on blast with a letter from the state saying that you sold us fraudulent goods. And the challenge that we had in Texas, where, of the they stopped with the CDC list, they knocked a lot of stuff off of what was accessible or allowable 3 or 4 times. And what was interesting for the industry is because you have these KN95s that are available at like $1 a pop now, which were like $265. Why? Because they have boatloads of them and they can't get rid of them. But the bigger fraud that we're seeing, and I think this is where maybe the blockchain solutions might come in, is that you get a box and 30%, when you put the calipers on them, they test, right? And for everyone here who doesn't understand this, there's a thickness. There are usually 4 or 5 layers, and they're supposed to be specific thickness. But 70% of the merchandise inside of those boxes will fail. So what we're saying is it's fake product inserted inside of that as well. So these are, figuring out who you're purchasing from and really kind of owning those relationships and going back to the manufacturers, I think is going to be key over the next 6 to 12 months. Yeah, no,
I mean, I think you guys could make some exceptional points there. And I think one of the things you guys are getting at too is, testing and, to be able to actually assess real quality. And there are issues with that, right? I mean, even in Vietnam, if you're trying to do an SGS inspection on the actual test for the quality of the gloves, they can't actually do it in Vietnam. So they need to send it over to China, which is the nearest facility for testing. And that apparently will take 30 days for a turnaround. So the best thing you can do at SGS is simply do a visual inspection, which is not bad. You can do a field, you can do that, but you know, that's the limit. So it's interesting that a lot of people, obviously, you know, everyone wants an SGS inspection, but there's a limit to what that can do. I want to move this over to Patrick, because we're getting very, very detailed now, which is great. Of course, we could talk like that for 24 hours or, you know, a whole week. But I want to bring this back out a little bit onto more of an aerial view, because, you know, Patrick, you have an exceptional background in business intelligence. And so I'm curious if there's anything interesting you came across in any of the data sets that you've analyzed, you know, that are relevant to what's happening in the supply chain, and especially the stakeholders that are most needed is PPE. You know, any trends or anything that you've seen that's of note?
Yes. So the thing that we're seeing, I managed locally 26 hospitals out of Bakersfield. The supplies, the patients, the flow, everything. And it's incredible the amount of data that we have. And the data that we've been able to pull was based on assumptions 10 years ago that we could not even have known today. So the data that we have is kind of partial. So we have to, there's a leap that we have to make in terms of what does it all mean? And what we're finding is that two things, is that with all the automation, it's actually highlighting how weak communication is. Two, that there's so much data. It's not a lack of data. It's just there's so much data that drawing a correlation is very difficult. And it really takes data scientists to understand what the correlation is. As people become sicker, as more testing is done, of course the rates go up. But what it doesn't indicate is that we're actually using more tests. Finally, is in these type of situations, when you're searching for product, what I always look for in a big ticket item, and you correct me if I'm wrong, when you go buy a car, you like the way it looks, but overall you're buying a warranty. So you go look at a Honda, and I just saw a billboard today for a Honda, that there's a 250,000 mile, 20-year warranty on the drivetrain alone. Now, that's not a bad car. Somebody who's willing to stand behind their product, that's a great sale. I wasn't a big fan of Hyundai, but I did spend a year in Korea, and they're great cars. And the thing with the Hyundais, they offer a 100,000 mile, 10-year warranty. How can you go wrong with something like that when money is important? So what I look at when I'm purchasing on large levels is what type of warranty or remediation do they offer? I know the product is homogeneous. It's a nitrile glove, 4 mil. It should do what it's supposed to do. But when there's a problem, will you return it? Will you send me the right stuff? I know these things are going to break. I know everyone's in a hurry, but I want to know, will they send me the right stuff? Next is, how do I know I'm getting the best price? So reverse auctions are really, to me, buying at a high level, important. So I developed a reverse auction called PPE online auction, in which case I represent very, very large buyers who have a need. And then I just source it out to vendors and say, what is your best price? Because I can buy gloves for $6 a box, but then I've got to get it here. And then the price of getting it here, CIF, goes up to $14 a box, and they think that I'm gouging. I'm not gouging. It's just that's what aircraft are charging or ships are charging to get it over here. So there's three phases. One is just acquiring the good. Two is getting it here. And then three is the quality control of the aspect. And for me, I look for partners who can manage those different elements. My auction works, my reverse auction works. I definitely have the buyers in the billions of product. The problem, as James had indicated earlier, is how do I make sure that the product is what I ordered?
I think that's super important. And to just one of the things that Patrick had mentioned, which is a huge consideration. At one point, FEMA had purchased a good chunk of all of the 747 cargoes coming into the United States. And that's not, I don't think that's necessarily the case right now, but they paid a higher premium for them. So we were talking about an aircraft that on a one-way trip from China typically cost us $350,000 to $380,000. And so you amortize that over the cost of how much product you can put in there. One of these, you can fit typically 3 million KN95 or N95 masks, right? Well, the cost of that plane for about 2 months went up to $1.4 million on average just to get it here one way. So all of those costs carry down. And I think, you know, a lot of this also speaks to the fact, work with med supply companies, work with folks who've come in. There's a lot of people that have come from a lot of different industries and sort of hopped in. You know, I mean, I was on the board of a company and I got asked to help out. And the people I'm working with have been in this industry for 20 years. And we've always done tech work and blockchain work and big data work and JCAHO, you know, type accreditations. But I think finding a track record of folks and then also really understanding some of the complexities that you're going to have on the ground. Boxes of gloves right now are typically going anywhere from 11 to 15. And a month ago, they were all the way up to 19 bucks. And part of the problem there is, who are you getting them through? What are the broker chains? And I think, you know, the reverse auctions are great. And Patrick, love to pick that up with you at some point. But to what James is saying about the production side of this too, that's a huge concern, because it's not just the quality and it's not the number of manufacturers. We're probably 8 to 12 months from running into, you know, just supply chain challenges with cotton. Okay, so when that happens, we're going to have a mask issue. And we're running into problems with the manufacturer of gowns. So that's going to create an additional issue. And so what we have to be thinking about is not just, you know, how are we maintaining and managing these things. A lot of the hospitals we've talked to, they're starting to buy now for what they expect will be 30 days. Because, you know, we saw the Memorial Day bump. We're now going to see the protest bump that happens after this. And then you'll see secondary, tertiary bumps from other events that happen. But it's also, from a data standpoint, difficult to say. I think we're still in the first cycle of this, right? And Patrick, would you concur with that? Can someone unmute Patrick?
Yeah, we need to unmute him somehow.
Yes. Yeah, I would concur with that. So we're looking at now yearly cycle of what will we need for the year, because we don't know when we can get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think that's where purchasing should be looking. I also think from a budgeting standpoint, if you're working for a state, you should be looking at that. And we need to move away from some of these older systems. You know, the way that states have been purchasing, it's like they're purchasing 3 years ago. You know, it's like, are you on this approved vendor list, this, that, and everything else? I mean, we have access to, and I also think that there's some look that needs to be done in terms of what the treatments are, because the doctors we've been talking to, they should be treating this more like high altitude sickness than they should the respirators. But I have access to American-made respirators, you know, and you should be at least trying to build a network of at least 5 to 10 people you're talking to the inside of the supplier space, if you're just a smaller hospital, because otherwise you're going to have 1 or 2 people just kicking you product, but you're not necessarily getting the best price.
May I comment on that from the hospital standpoint? I was noticing before the COVID, there was an actual drop in admissions. Now, hospitals survive on admissions, and really they survive on surgeries. And I was noticing back in November that there was already a massive drop. We were already laying off nurses. Now, remember, we're a high-end hospital. We were already laying off nurses and already canceling physician group contracts. We were already downsizing on the administrative side severely. There's across the board. Yes, go ahead.
Patrick, we have about 2 minutes.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
When would you like to give the final wrap-up question?
Maybe let Patrick answer this question, and then let's get
So the thing is that the hospitals themselves are losing key personnel and a brain drain right before this already happened. So now when I want to make a purchase on a glove, like we had a needle, we just wanted a needle that we bought. There's a committee we have to sit on, meets once a month. We present it to the committee this month. Next month we think about it. And then the following month we make a decision. So it's 3 months to make a decision on anything. And that is a huge logjam, and nobody knows where to even source it. The logistics people are already stretched thin, and they don't have the staff that they used to have. The programs we're using, Cerner and Epic, are vastly outdated, and they have incorrectly billed billions of dollars worth of procedures, which now hospitals can't collect. Hospitals are hurting badly. So that's why going outside that chain and creating something like a reverse auction, just saying, here, it's here, just order what you need, take what you have and use it, because in an emergency, you know, any port in a storm at this point, they'll use it, it'll break, but they'll use it because you have to have something.
Right.
That's a big log jam.
Okay, so I want to actually on that note, it's a perfect segue to say one thing, which is I think that everyone here has some exceptional information to share, and we will be doing more of these. And in fact, we can do one specifically just about exactly what you're talking about, Patrick. You know, talking about things, you know, projecting out for a year. How do we actually, you know, mitigate some of these issues about decision making? You know, how do we actually get to the, you know, cut through the noise on a lot of things? So we will be doing more of these, and I think this is incredible. I mean, just amongst the three of you, I think there's so much that we can talk about. Thank you guys again, really, for all the insights in such a short amount of time. I'm going to be handing it back over to Alice to transition and introduce the next session.